I'm really starting to enjoy this. The first night I did this, it was so weird because the following day I went to the office to edit the quote unquote podcast, and it was a lot more work than I expected. Like I had to, because there was like a huge audio file, and I haven't edited video in like years. And I went in and I was like, cool, what apps do I have to edit video? And I remember when when I was a teenager, I tried editing video like gunshots and stuff, and I used a program called Adobe After Effects. And so, that was my first instinct. I was like, okay, cool, let's go download Adobe After Effects. And I downloaded After Effects and I was like, this is way too complicated just to edit like a simple video. And I was like, okay, cool, but I already downloaded the app and it was like gigabyte, like I don't know, I think it was like 3 gigabytes or something, and I wasted all this time. And I was like, cool, I'm just gonna edit the video in After Effects. And I was like, all right, how do I? And I clicked the render button, and I was like, okay, it's gonna take a while. It literally said estimated time like 1 hour or something, and I was like, okay, cool, I'm just gonna leave it and go for lunch. When I came back, my computer said you're out of memory. And at first I was like, are you kidding me? How is it possible that I'm out of memory? And I clicked on the video file, and the video file was like 300 gigabytes. And then I realized that if you are on After Effects and you decide to render the video without using something called Adobe something encoder, media encoder or something, it saves the file as lossless, which is like, like hi-fi music, it's like no data is lost at all, and it's like impossible to use because I don't need a lossless video, and I spent the whole afternoon trying to render the video, and it finally worked. And I know in the last podcast, I said I will link some photos, but I didn't end up doing that because I was just so frustrated with, not frustrated, but I was just so overwhelmed with editing video. I was like, cool, we'll do it next time. But tonight we are drinking beer. We are not drinking. The other night we were drinking something a little bit stronger, and as you can see, like I felt like the other night I was too serious. Like I feel like I gotta take a chill pill, lay back a little bit, and that's why like the camera's a little bit further away, not all up in my face. And yeah, it's just I'm really enjoying this, and I thought tonight would be a good opportunity for me to talk about another thing that is really dear to me, and also it was a really big part of my life, and that was going to boarding school. Leaving my family for the first time ever. So if you guys didn't know, I went to a boarding school in Australia called Aquinas College, and first of all, it was one of the best experiences in my life. Like I met some of the greatest people I've ever met, did some of the greatest things I've ever done. It was a great experience, but at the time, it was also one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life. And so I was 16 at the time, and maybe I should give you some context about high school in Malaysia. I'm sure some people listening to this are from Malaysia and they've been through the system. But for my dear friends in Australia who have not been through or are not familiar with the Malaysian way of educating people in high school, let me explain it to you. And first of all, high schools in Malaysia, you have to do, I think it's 11 subjects or 12 or 13. I don't quite remember. And you go to school. I think it's like 7. I used to remember waking up at like 6:30, and I think school starts at 7 and it ends at like 1 p.m. in the afternoon. But because you've got so many subjects, most of the time the teachers would say, stay back, and you would have to do some extra curricular classes just to catch up, because the workload is so big. And me growing up, I was never really cool. I was never really good at sports growing up, and I didn't really fit in. I just never really fit in at all, and mostly because of that is, so I'm Chinese, but I'm from Malaysia, and this is, by the way, this is a very big talking point when I'm in Australia, and it's the thing that, look, I'm Chinese, but I was born in Malaysia, and so I don't identify as a person from mainland China. I am not from China. Literally, I am not. I speak Chinese. I know some of the traditions. My family practices the traditions passed down from our ancestors, but I am like fourth generation Malaysian. Like, I think either my great or my great grandfather came here as a refugee in like 18 something. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's 19 something. I don't know. I suck at history and I suck at geography. Those are not my strong suits, but yeah, they came over, and it's so weird because my culture, like, Malaysia is a really cool place to live. Like, the culture is so hybrid and so intertwined. There is no real, like, I'm Chinese. We celebrate, Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year every year. We still have some of the traditions. We still have some of the superstitions. But if you were to set, like, this astounds me. Like, when I was in Perth, when I was in Australia, people could tell, like, I was not from mainland China. And that was the most crazy thing, because, like, they could tell, like, it's really cool. But, apart from that, like, I am Chinese. I do speak Chinese, but my Chinese is really, really bad because I gave up studying Chinese early on. And my main language has always been English. And, this is the language I think in. This is the language I speak to myself in. And it's really weird because I don't have a specific accent. Like, my English is, I don't know what it is, but it is the language I speak the most. And also, a lot of people would say my accent is superficial. And in some ways it is, but I'm not faking this. Like, the only reason why I don't have a Malaysian accent right now is because I don't think in a Malaysian accent. But if I get my friend here, if I get a friend onto this podcast who is from Malaysia, then the Malaysian accent is gonna come out a little bit, and we are probably gonna speak like we are at the kopitiam. But at the same time, like, if I was to do this podcast in a Malaysian accent, like that, I would physically feel like I'm faking it, But when I speak like this, I'm not, like, because this is the accent I think to myself in, And when I'm in Australia, like, of course, like, some you tend to want to use some more mannerisms that are suitable for that place, and sometimes weird accents come out. But it is what it is, and I'm not here to try to be fake. I'm here trying to have a good time. Wow, I really skewed. I don't even know what I was talking about. Yes, fitting in. So I never really fit in because, and most people here, they speak Chinese, and my Chinese was never really good. And so I didn't, on the language part, already there was like a barrier. And on top of that, like, I was never really interested in doing anything that was considered like cool here. Like, when I was in high school, like, the cool kids would be like the basketball players, the sportsmen, the runners, all these people would be the cool kids. And so I was never the cool kid, I did like public speaking and storytelling competitions. I wasn't cool, at all. But I did have a really good time in my time in high school in Malaysia. So especially my last year in high school in Malaysia, which was Form 3, which is equivalent to Year 9. So Year 9 was my final year in high school in Malaysia in the government system. And I had a blast. I had a blast. I had a girlfriend. I had a girlfriend, like a high school girlfriend. I had a really close group of friends, and we would do like the most stupid shit at school ever. And I know that so in year 9 in Malaysia we have a public exam called PMR. I don't even know what it stands for anymore, but man, I fucked this exam. Like, I was never a stupid kid. I always got it in school, but I fucked this exam. Like, I remember the day I went to get my results, and they gave me like a slip of paper which showed my results, and I remember I tore it up. Like, those were my official results. Like, my official result, and I tore it up and I threw it away. I fucked it, man. And the reason why I fucked it was because I had too much fun. And a real tragedy happened in year 9. Again, a story for another day, because we're here to talk about boarding school. A few of my friends died in a car crash, in an accident. And that really gave me like a kick in the balls, man. That was like my wake up call. And it was like, hey, man, you better get moving. And that segued me into my family saying, hey, why don't you go to boarding school in Australia? And at first, I if you ask me now, like, I actually don't know why I said yes, but the fact of the matter is I did. And I was 16 at the time, and it was like, hey, do you want to leave your family to go try this thing out in Perth, Australia? And I did it, and that was a really tough time for me, for reals. And by the way, like, again, like, I'm on this podcast talking about like how I'm going through relationship issues now. I was really sad as a 16-year-old who left home, and like, I sound like a pussy, man, honestly. Like, there are a lot of people in the world who have gone through, who are, and are going to go through far greater hardships than me, and they're not complaining. But, we experience life in our own bubbles. We are born into this earth, and we encapsulate this piece of the universe as ourselves, and we live in this perception. And so we're doing the best we can, like, I understand that my problems are minuscule in comparison to greater issues in life, but it's not that I'm not empathetic to other people. It's just that, however much I want to be empathetic, I can't, because I don't have, maybe it's because I haven't got that level of grace to extend my life to a level where it encapsulates someone else. But, all I can say now is, this is the life I perceive, and I'm here trying to do the best I can. And if, so I was 16. I remember the day I was at the airport, and, I could say goodbye to my brothers. I could say goodbye to anyone, but the hardest goodbye was the goodbye to my dad, because my dad is a traditional Asian dad, but although he is my dad does show love and care and compassion, but he does have that persona of wanting to uphold this image of like masculinity and emotional security and stability. And so I remember this so clearly. I was at the airport, and we were about to leave, and I say we because my mom and my grandma went with me the first time around just to help me set up at the school and everything. And I remember my dad, the drive to the airport was already really hard because I was trying to keep it together, but when we got to the airport, I hugged my dad. I got off the car, and I went into the terminal, and everything was checked in, and we were about to line up to have our boarding passes validated so that we could enter the departure hall. And at an airport, like the departure hall is like the place where once you step into the departure hall, you're sort of like, sayonara, baby, you're out of here. Like, it's official that you're out of here. But before you step in there, you can still interact with the people outside and do all these things. And I remember so clearly, I said goodbye to my dad, and you could still see so this was the departure hall, and there were glass windows all around here, and this is where the cars would leave. And I remember so clearly my dad leaving, and I had already said goodbye. My dad leaving, and I was like, "All right, Nathan, you have to man up. You have to do this." But deep down, I really wanted to just have like one last goodbye with my dad. And I remember as I was about to walk into the departure hall, my dad's car came around again, and I was able to have that one last goodbye with my dad before I left for boarding school. And that was really meaningful for me, and so we flew to Perth. And when we got there, went to school, and after we set everything up, my parents, my mom and my grandma, they left. And that was that. I was 16, alone in a foreign place. I've been out of the country, but I've never been in a place where it's just all Caucasian people or like white people. I think I've been to Japan, Europe, but that was like a holiday. It's not like you're engulfed in like a different culture. And I don't even really know where to start. Like, it was a really interesting journey. And but yeah, there were some really dark times, and so I remember in my boarding school dorm room, I put up a piece of paper, and the piece of paper was literally like a calendar, and it marked down the days I had until I could leave home for the holidays. I think like every term was like 60 days or something, and 60 days really isn't that long, but at the time, it felt like an eternity, man. Like it felt so long. And in boarding school, the room was like a shoebox, and actually in boarding school, we did call the rooms. So the rooms were like in a row, right? Like, this was a room, there's a room next to it, and a room next to that, and it was like in a row. And the rooms in the middle, they had less space, so they were literally called like a shoebox, and the room it's literally a rectangle. It had a bed on one corner, like on one side of the room. The door was like right there. There were no locks on the door. So if you had your dick in your hand and some guy walked in, they would literally see you with your dick in your hand. Like, there were no locks. The bed was right here. And oh, by the way, it was an all boys boarding school. I've always been at a co-ed school, and this was a boys school, and on the right side, it was a desk. And next to the desk was like a tiny cupboard, and that was your room. And I don't think, when I went to boarding school, I don't think there were individual air conditioning units in the room. And, like the climate in Australia on some days is not very forgiving, man. You get some really cold mornings, and you get some really, really, really hot days. And I remember in winter, on some of the really cold mornings, like because like there was only centralized air conditioning, and sometimes the people who worked there, they'd forget to turn it on, and after a certain hour, like there would not be staff around the boarding school, so you'd just be alone. Like the kids would just be alone. And when the centralized air conditioning wasn't on, I tucked myself in my blanket, and because the bed was up against the wall, I would tuck the blanket all around me, and I would push myself, like my arm and my leg, up against the wall, so I felt like there was something pushing back. It's not like, clearly it's not like a person or something, but it's just like when you're at a time when you're so alone, and you're not self-sufficient, when you're literally like a child. Like, this gave me a lot of comfort, like to be able to lean against the wall, that gave me a lot of comfort. And if anyone out there is gonna go to boarding school, or is at a place where maybe they're going to university, and they're going through like homesickness, it's natural. Like, I was homesick for a very long time, and to be honest, it's not just homesick, it's also like culture shock, like, because you miss your family, but you're also in a place where the culture, the people, the mannerisms are completely different. So, because if you grow up in a place for 16 years, you're used to how things run in that place for 16 years. And if you don't have a strong sense of self, if you don't have a strong sense of who you are, what you're worth, then, if you expect something to happen a certain way and the whole environment is something that's different, like, it really fucks with your head, especially with like how jokes are made. In Australia, man, you motherfuckers have a really, really brutal sense of comedy. I remember some guy was like, "Oh, you Asian motherfucker," or "you chink," and I took it the wrong way because I felt offended, because I was really defensive, because like when you're at a place where you're a kid and you're weak and you don't really know what to do and you're in a new place, and these kids, they're all friends, like they're all friends, they're all from the country, they're like cowboys. And they're just having a great time talking about footy, talking about girls, and you're just there like you're just a tiny Asian guy with a tiny Asian dick, and they're like, "Oh man, Samantha's so hot, I banged her last week," or something like this, or like, "Oh, the footy game's so cool," and like they're on the footy field, and I'm just here. I'm like, how the fuck am I supposed to play this sport? Because I'm gonna get slaughtered, And yeah, like when you're at a place where the culture is so different, like, it's just a shock to you, it takes some time to get used to. And the idea of like being homesick, like, man, like, please, if you're feeling homesick right now, please cut yourself some slack, man. Like, of course you're going to feel homesick. Like, that's the place you learned to love. That's the place you learned how to do things. That's the place where the people who love you are at, like, it's natural to feel homesick. And like, the only advice I can give anyone if they're going through like something like this, if they're homesick or if they're at a place in their life where they feel down, there are levels to how you feel as a person. You have your physical body, you have your emotions, your thoughts, and there are levels to this. And so if your emotions are in turmoil, you're homesick, you're experiencing culture shock, or you're going through a breakup, or it doesn't matter what you're doing, if your emotions are at whack, you can't fix your emotions just like that. You can think wonderful thoughts, but unless you have unless you've really built up a sense of like willpower to fight your subconscious mind, you cannot change your emotions. And so the only thing you can do is have good thoughts, but is to put your body to work. Because when your body is working, then you build better memories. If you build better memories, then you validate yourself. If you validate yourself, your emotions get rewritten. So you get the ball rolling, So if you're going through something, the most important thing is you have to be yes to life. You can't be at a place where you're like, okay, I'm feeling homesick. I'm just going to lie here watching Netflix with a sack of potato chips and, suck. Like, what's the word? Sulk? Just feeling shit about yourself, having that sense of self-pity. You just have to be yes to life. And that means like going out there and doing things, And when I was in boarding school, like, man, like, you gotta understand, like, I grew up in a tiny town. And you know what? I need to stop saying tiny town because it's not that tiny. It's more like a tiny city. Like when I was in Perth, and I said I came from a tiny town, and the people there, in boarding school, a lot of people came from the bush. They came from like, how do I explain the bush to people who are not from Australia? They came from the outskirts of town, from the country. Yeah, they came from the country, and they're like, "Oh, hey Nathan, nice to meet you." And I'm like, "Yeah, hey, my name's Nathan. I come from a small town, And they're like, "Oh, cool. How many people are in your town?" And I'm like, "Oh, like 300,000." And they're like, "That's not a small town, man." Like, and their town, when their definition of a small town would be like some country down south, which has like 600 people and like one row of shops. Now that's a small town. And so, yeah, I should really stop calling it a small town. It's more like a small city. But yeah, I came from a small city, a really conservative. Well, it's growing now. It's changing. People everywhere in the world, people are getting more progressive. So it's changing now. But yeah, it used to be very conservative, and that conservatism means my parents were really protective of me. It meant I didn't I didn't have the chance to go catch a movie with my friends until I was like 16. And by the way, I hate nature. I'm sorry I'm saying this, but I don't hate nature. It's just like I don't like being in the outdoors. I like being in a controlled environment, and I'm trying to change that. I'm trying to break free. I'm trying to expand my comfort zone. I'm going hiking next week. I love the sunlight and everything, but I don't like it when it's like bugs and mud, and I don't like that. Like it's just okay. And so when I was in boarding school, like the first week was really tough, man. And going back to the idea of being yes to life, like, so some guy rocked up. I think he rocked up and he was like, "Hey, do you want to join the rowing team?" And I was like, "The rowing team, the rowing." At that point I had never been on the water before in my life, and I was like, "Okay, cool, yeah, I'll do the rowing team." And then another person was like, "Hey, do you want to join the choir, the boys ensemble?" I was like, "Cool, I'll do that." And another group came up and I was like, "Hey, do you want to join the musical?" I'm like, "Yes, I'll do that." "Do you want to play badminton?" "Yes, I'll do that." "Do you want to try and play the cello?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'll do that." And, it really progressed me forward, because like when you have things going on in your life to distract you from like the pain of something like leaving home, even if you like, I was so busy to a point where like I didn't have time to feel shit about myself. And, that's not in the long run. If you do that without self-reflection, that's a really toxic way to live, and you would probably end up in a very depressed place in your life. But with the necessary amount of self-reflection, it can be very, very healthy for you, because when you're busy, you have no time to be sad, and if you have no time to be sad, then your emotions will slowly rescind, and you can slowly reprogram your subconscious with better memories, with better emotions. And I feel like the step and also, like, let me just clarify this, like, this for me was a short-term fix. Like, yes, I was very busy, I was entertained, I wasn't feeling sad. But once I achieved, like, for example, when the choir, the boys ensemble would be like, "Okay, on the 30th of March, you would have to sing at this event." And, I'll be so psyched up about that event, and I'll be practicing with the team. And when that event came, and after I sang in that event, I felt empty again, because like I achieved it, I felt down again. So that's why you need to have the sense of self-reflection. You have to be like, "Okay, cool, I achieved this. I'm very proud of myself." And you have to take inventory of yourself again, and I feel like I was in this cycle for like the first year, really. And only in the second year, when I went back home and I appreciated the beautiful things here, where I took for granted before I left, and also appreciated the things I took for granted when I was in Perth, and reconciled everything, that was when I truly broke free. That was when I was like in boarding school, and I was happy, I was joyful, and my days became shorter. They weren't, super depressing or super long. And yeah, and I feel like in anything in life, if you're at a place where your emotions and your thoughts are not in check, you have to do something physical. But once you do something physical, you have to open yourself up to vulnerability again, and you have to reconcile your emotions. Because if you don't do that, then you don't take inventory. It's like saying like it's like, you get $1 million, but you don't plan out how you're gonna spend that $1 million. And so you just have it there, it's really empty, and yeah, that got me through boarding school. And again, when you're down in life, ask for help, man. Like, don't have like this ego about yourself. Like, man, I used to be controlled by my ego, and you just have to open yourself up to asking for help. Like, when I was there and I was sad, I didn't hide it. Like, when I felt shitty, I cried in front of the boys. And it was a boys boarding, like, it was a it was a boys boarding school. It was an all boys boarding school. And like, I was just some Asian guy crying in front of everyone. And like, I felt like I couldn't, you can't hide that vulnerability in your life. You just have to open yourself up, and you have to ask for help. Because when you don't ask for help, like you get consumed by your negativity, because things may be going great in your life, and the only reason why you're feeling bad is because of yourself. And if you don't have good, reliable people in your life telling you what's what, people you can trust, then it's really hard for you to move forward in your life, because you either get stuck in a place or you go down onto a path where you're just full of your own delusions. So you need accountable people in your life, and the only way for you to get accountable people in your life is if you ask for help, and sometimes you may get really bad help, and it doesn't matter, and sometimes you may get really good help, which you should be very grateful for, And for the most part, going through boarding school, it taught me that there are good people in the world, that there are people who are willing to help, people who are great, who are gracious, people who are selfless. And I owe a lot to Aquinas College, because it really built up my character of what it means to be an accountable person, of what it means to be responsible, to be a man. And when I look back right now, like it's some of the best memories in my life, when I finally got into the flow of things, when I made real connections and real friends, it turned into something beautiful. So, no matter what's going on in your life right now, you have to be able to see that, it's your life is as beautiful or as terrible as you make it to be. If you wake up in the morning and you say to yourself and you believe the fact that you are deserving of a wonderful life, and that no matter what happens in your life, you will get that sense of achievement, that sense of happiness, then that's the story of your life. But if you wake up in the morning and you're impulsive and you just respond to the world instead of being proactive, instead of being proactive, if you're reactive, if you wake up and say something bad happens, like the air conditioning stops working, and you let yourself be defined by that, and you personalize everything, then this would be your detriment, because you just gotta keep moving. You just gotta keep moving forward, and yeah. And that's boarding school. If you enjoyed this episode of the Rabbit Hole Podcast, please hit the subscribe button. I'm sorry if and they say they say when I used to do like public speaking, they say don't apologize to the audience, which I feel is total bullshit, because when Hitler, I'm sorry I said that, that's a bad example, but when Hitler gave his speeches, he didn't apologize, but that's because he was a psychopath narcissist, and trying to manipulate people. When great leaders speak, they don't apologize to people. I get that, but we're not trying to give a speech on like revolutionizing the world. We're trying to have an authentic conversation, and in doing so, I should be able to apologize. So I apologize if this episode of the podcast is not very structured or organized, and that is mainly because, like, again, I'm winging it, and this is taking form. This is really its conception. It will get better. I will be getting guests into this podcast, and we will have more meaningful conversations in the future. So if you enjoyed this episode of the Rabbit Hole Podcast, please hit the subscribe button down below. If you have any questions, if you want me to talk about a specific topic, if there's anything you would like to know, leave it in the comments. But other than that, whatever you're going through right now, know that better times are in the future. Know to keep moving forward, and no matter what you're doing, make sure to go a little bit further and to dive in to the rabbit hole. Take care, everybody. Thank you, and have a good night.